Mother's Day had always been a quiet, unremarkable day for me. Sometimes Michael would call, sometimes he'd forget until the evening. I'd learned not to expect much. But this year, for reasons I can't even explain, I decided to make it special. I cleaned my little house from top to bottom, polished the silver, and baked my husband's favorite apple pie, even though he's been gone for 8 years now. The table was set with my best china. The tulips I'd splurged on that morning glowing yellow in the sunlight streaming through the window. I wanted the place to feel warm, welcoming. Part of me hoped, that maybe we could have the kind of family dinner that feels like love. The doorbell rang right on 6. Michael walked in with Sophie, his wife, and their 6-year-old daughter, Emma. Sophie looked like she'd stepped straight out of a magazine, wearing a cream silk dress and heels that didn't belong in my modest home. She carried a glossy gift bag in one hand and Emma's tiny hand in the other. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," Michael said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. He looked good, healthy, but there was a certain tension in his smile. "Happy Mother's Day, Linda," Sophie added, her tone bright and sugary, the kind of voice people use when they're talking to someone they don't really know well. We all sat down, and I started to bring food to the table: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, warm bread from the bakery. But before I could finish, Sophie cleared her throat. "Before we eat, we have some gifts to hand out," she said, smiling at her mother, Evelyn, who was seated across from me. From the glossy bag, Sophie pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to Evelyn. Evelyn's face lit up the moment she opened it, a diamond bracelet that sparkled even in my soft dining room light. "Oh my goodness!" Evelyn gasped, clasping a hand over her mouth. "It's beautiful." $15,000, Sophie said proudly. "We wanted you to have something truly special, Mom. You deserve it." The words landed like a pebble in my stomach. $15,000. Then Sophie turned to me. For a split second, I thought maybe she had something thoughtful tucked away. Instead, she handed me a small brown paper bag from a local tea shop. Inside was a box of inexpensive herbal tea. "And this," Sophie said with a little laugh, "comes with an agreement. If you sell it and it turns out to be worth a fortune, half is mine." Michael chuckled. Evelyn smiled awkwardly. Emma was too busy buttering her bread to notice. I smiled too, though it felt like my cheeks were made of stone. "Very thoughtful," I said, setting the tea on the table. "It's a joke, Mom," Michael said, waving a hand. "We know you like tea." We moved on to dinner, but the air had shifted. As I watched Sophie lean in to fasten the bracelet on her mother's wrist, I couldn't stop my mind from circling back to the number she'd said: 15,000. I had never seen Michael spend that much on anything except maybe a down payment for his own benefit. The meal ended with pie and coffee, polite conversation, and forced smiles. When they finally left, I stood at the doorway and waved, the little box of tea still sitting untouched on the counter. Later, when the house was quiet, I made myself a cup of tea, not from that box, and sat at the kitchen table. I wanted to believe it was just a thoughtless joke, but deep down, something felt wrong. And I had the uneasy feeling I'd be finding out exactly how wrong very soon. The next morning started like any other. The tulips from last night were beginning to wilt, leaning their bright heads toward the table as if they'd grown weary. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down with my laptop to pay bills, something I'd done every month for decades without much thought. I opened my bank account and began scrolling through the transactions. Utilities, grocery store, the bakery where I'd picked up bread for dinner. Then my eyes caught on something that didn't belong. May 11th, Diamond Loft Jewelers, $15,000. I blinked, certain I was misreading. I hadn't been anywhere near a jewelry store, let alone spent more money than I'd made in several months combined. My first thought was that it had to be fraud, some stranger using my card. But then an image popped into my mind. Evelyn's diamond bracelet glinting in the dining room light. My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone and called Michael. He answered on the third ring. "Morning, Mom," he said casually. "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm looking at my bank statement. There's a charge for $15,000 at Diamond Loft Jewelers. Do you know anything about that?" There was a pause, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Then he chuckled, like it was no big deal. "Oh, that. Yeah, that's where we bought Mom Evelyn's bracelet. Beautiful, isn't it?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Michael, that money came from my account." "Technically," he said, "it's family money. You weren't going to use it. It was just sitting there." "That's not how this works," I said, my voice shaking now. "You don't take money from my account without asking me. That's theft." "It's not stealing when it's for family," he said sharply. "Sophie's mom has done a lot for us. She deserved something nice." "What about me?" I asked before I could stop myself. There was a beat of silence. "You're my mother. You did what mothers are supposed to do. Sophie's mom went above and beyond. This was us thanking her." It hit like a slap. All those years after his father died, working double shifts to keep him in school, skipping vacations, wearing the same winter coat year after year, it was just what I was supposed to do. "I can't believe you think that makes this okay," I said. "Well, it's done," he replied flatly. "Maybe next time you'll think about what your money could do for someone else." I ended the call before my anger boiled over. The rest of the day felt strange, like I was moving through someone else's house. I passed photos of Michael as a little boy, gap-toothed, sunburned from Little League, wearing the suit I'd bought for his high school graduation, and wondered how that boy had turned into this man. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bracelet, saw Evelyn's delighted face, heard Michael's casual dismissal of what he'd done. By morning, I knew I had to do something I should have done years ago. At the bank, a young woman named Carla greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Taylor?" "I need to remove my son's access to my accounts," I said. "Immediately." Her smile faded, but she didn't ask questions. She pulled up the forms, and I signed them one by one. When she handed me the final confirmation, I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in a long time, I was protecting myself. That feeling lasted until later that afternoon when my phone rang. "Michael, did you cut me off?" His voice was tight, accusatory. "I secured my money," I said evenly. "This is unbelievable," he snapped. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to have your own mother treat you like a thief?" "I didn't treat you like one," I replied. "You acted like one." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "You're going to regret this, Mom. You have no idea what you've started." The line went dead. I sat there, the quiet of the house pressing in around me, and for the first time, I wondered just how far he was willing to go. 2 mornings later, I was pouring coffee when my phone buzzed with a message from my old friend Margaret. "Linda, I just saw something on Facebook. Please tell me it's not true." I frowned, setting the mug down. Not true could mean a dozen things these days. I opened Facebook and scrolled, my thumb hesitating when I saw Sophie's smiling face at the top of my feed. She'd posted a picture of her and Michael at a restaurant, champagne glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Heartbroken to share that my own mother-in-law has cut us off from what has always been family money. All because we used a little to show gratitude to the person who's been there for us most. My mom." Some people forget what family is supposed to mean. My breath caught. Beneath the post were dozens of comments. That's awful. Family should support each other. Wow. Can't believe a mother would do that to her son. It's just money. She should be happy to help. I could almost hear Sophie's voice in those comments. Her phrasing, her way of making herself sound like the injured party. By lunchtime, she doubled down with an Instagram story. In the video, she sat in her car, eyes red but still perfectly made up. I don't usually share private family matters, but this is too painful to keep inside. Michael's mom cut off our access to family funds without warning. We used a small portion to buy a gift for someone who's done so much for us, and now we're treated like criminals. She sniffled at just the right moment, adding, I guess some people value money over family. I turned my phone off. I couldn't watch her twist the truth into something unrecognizable. But avoiding it didn't stop the ripples. At the grocery store that afternoon, I caught a neighbor quickly looking away when I passed. Another offered a stiff hello, then busied herself with the canned goods display. That night, I listened to my voicemail. One message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, I'm hearing some stuff about you and Michael. Call me, okay? Another, from a woman I knew from church. We should talk. People are saying things, and I'd like to hear your side. I didn't call back. I knew how these conversations would go. They'd ask polite questions, I'd explain, they'd nod sympathetically, and still believe whatever version of the story they wanted to believe. The next day, Michael joined in. He posted on LinkedIn, of all places, a long piece about financial ethics within families and mutual respect for shared resources. It didn't name me outright, but it didn't need to. Anyone who knew us could read between the lines. His colleagues praised his maturity and candor. I read every comment, my jaw tightening with each one. By the end of the week, it felt like the walls of my own home were closing in. I stopped answering calls unless I recognized the number. I skipped my usual Saturday breakfast at the diner, not wanting to overhear whispers or see pitying looks. It wasn't just the lies that hurt. It was knowing my own son was letting them spread, even feeding them, all to justify what he'd done. That Sunday night, I sat alone in the darkened living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. My eyes landed on the little box of tea Sophie had given me, still unopened, still sitting on the shelf where I'd placed it after dinner. I didn't know it then, but inside that box was the one thing that would turn everything around. It was a Thursday evening, and I was slouched on the couch, flipping through channels without really watching anything. My mind kept drifting back to the Facebook posts, the comments, the way people's voices seemed to change when they talked to me lately. I almost changed the channel when the local news anchor's cheerful voice announced, "And now for tonight's Powerball numbers, remember, the jackpot is a record-breaking $150 million. The numbers appeared on the screen. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42. Powerball, 18. Something about them looked familiar. I sat up, frowning. Where had I seen those before? And then I remembered. The tea box. Sophie had tucked a lottery ticket inside it on Mother's Day, making that snide little joke about splitting the winnings. I'd barely looked at the thing, assuming it was just one more thoughtless gesture, and tossed it into the kitchen trash with the wrapping paper. My heart began to pound. I grabbed a pen from the coffee table and scribbled the numbers down, reading them aloud under my breath like they were some kind of incantation. Then I walked to the kitchen trash can. It wasn't a pleasant search. Coffee grounds, wilted lettuce, crumpled napkins. But near the bottom, stuck to the side of an empty yogurt container, was the ticket. Wrinkled, stained, but intact. I rinsed it gently under the tap, smoothing it out against the counter. The numbers stared back at me, clear as day. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42. Powerball, 18. Every single one matched. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My breath came fast, shallow, like I'd just run up a flight of stairs. Could this really be happening? I grabbed the phone and dialed the lottery hotline. The automated voice was calm, almost soothing. The winning numbers for tonight's drawing are 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and the Powerball is 18. The jackpot amount is $150 million. I hung up, my hand trembling. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the ticket as if it might vanish if I blinked. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the ticket in a Ziploc bag on the nightstand, checking it every hour to make sure it was still there. My mind spun through possibilities. What this meant for me, how it would change my life, and yes, how Michael and Sophie would react. By morning, I knew I needed to take it to the lottery office. The building downtown was sleek and modern, all glass and steel. I felt out of place in my sensible shoes and navy cardigan, but the receptionist greeted me warmly. A man in a suit led me into a small office where he scanned the ticket with a special device. "Well, Ms. Taylor," he said, looking up with a smile. "Congratulations. This is the winning ticket for last night's Powerball draw." I think I stopped breathing for a moment. "Now, the verification process for a jackpot this size will take 48 hours, he explained. "We'll confirm the ticket's authenticity through multiple checks, prepare the legal documents, and discuss payout options." I nodded numbly, signing where he indicated, answering questions automatically. When I got home, I'd barely set my bag down when I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. Michael's car. He didn't bother knocking, just walked in, Sophie right behind him. "Mom," he said, his voice too bright. "We heard the news. One of Sophie's friends knows someone at the lottery office. They said your name's on the winner's list." Sophie stepped forward. "Do you realize what this means? We're millionaires. Remember, I gave you that ticket. Half is mine." I stayed seated at the kitchen table, the ticket still in its plastic sleeve between my hands. "It was a gift, Sophie. It was a gift with an agreement," she shot back. "Everyone at that dinner heard me say half was mine." "You bought it with money you took from my account without asking," I said, my voice steady. "It was never about sharing. It was about you controlling everything." Michael's smile vanished. "Don't start this again, Mom. We had a deal." "No," I said, looking from one to the other. "You had an assumption." Sophie's jaw tightened. "If you think you can keep all of it, you're dreaming. We'll take you to court." I folded my hands over the ticket. "You do what you have to do." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sophie spun on her heel and walked out, Michael following, the front door slamming behind them. The house was quiet again. I looked down at the ticket, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I had the upper hand. The next morning, I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the landline rang. Almost no one called that number anymore, so I answered with a little hesitation. "Mrs. Taylor, this is Richard Harris, Sophie's father." I blinked. I'd only met him a couple of times at family gatherings. He was always polite but distant, the kind of man who kept his opinions to himself. "I hope I'm not intruding," he continued. "I was at your Mother's Day dinner. I saw the gift exchange, and I've been following what's been happening since. I think we need to talk." I wasn't sure whether this was going to be an ambush or a lifeline. "What about?" "The lottery ticket," he said simply, "and the truth." We agreed to meet at Murphy's Diner, a small place in town that smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. When I arrived, Richard was already in a booth by the window, a dark suit looking slightly out of place among the checkered floors and vinyl seats. "I appreciate you coming," he said, standing to shake my hand. He didn't waste time with small talk. I saw Sophie give you that lottery ticket. I heard the joke about splitting it. But there was no agreement, no discussion. It was clearly a gift. Hearing him say it so plainly sent a wave of relief through me. She's telling everyone the opposite, I said. I know, and it's wrong. It's damaging your name, and it's not who I raised her to be, he said, his mouth tightening. I looked at him carefully. Why tell me this? You're her father. Because truth matters, he said simply, and because enabling her in this will only make her worse. He pulled out his phone and showed me a Facebook post he'd drafted. As a witness to the Mother's Day gathering at Linda Taylor's home, I can confirm the lottery ticket in question was given as a gift with no conditions attached. Any claim to the contrary is false. I'm disappointed to see my own daughter and son-in-law attempting to damage Linda's reputation over something that is rightfully hers. You don't have to post that, I said. I do, he replied, and with one tap of his finger, it was live. I watched him take a sip of coffee as notifications began pinging on his phone. Within minutes, comments appeared. If Richard Harris says it, it's true. Glad someone finally spoke up for Linda. This changes everything. By the time I got home, my own phone was buzzing. Messages from neighbors, old coworkers, even my cousin in Florida, people apologizing for believing the worst. For the first time in weeks, the tide felt like it was turning. That afternoon, I sat by the kitchen window, sunlight spilling across the table, and let out a long breath. I still didn't know how this would end, but at least I wasn't standing alone anymore. 2 weeks later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Taylor, said the cheerful voice on the other end. This is Janet from the State Lottery Commission. Your ticket verification is complete. We'd like to invite you to our formal check presentation ceremony tomorrow morning. I hesitated. Is that public? Yes. Winners can choose a private meeting, but given the amount of public interest in your case... Her voice trailed off politely. I knew exactly what public interest meant. Michael and Sophie's campaign to paint me as greedy. This was my chance to take the story back. I'll do it publicly, I said. The next morning, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing the navy blazer I'd worn to my husband's funeral. A crisp white blouse, simple gold earrings. I wanted to look steady, not flashy, not vindictive. Just like a woman who had weathered something and come out stronger. When I arrived at the Lottery Commission building, the place buzzed with activity. Reporters testing microphones, photographers checking their angles, staffers bustling around with clipboards. Janet met me with a warm smile. Ready to become a millionaire? I smiled back. Ready to tell my story. They positioned me in front of a backdrop covered in the lottery's logo. The oversized check looked almost absurd, but I held it with both hands as camera flashes lit the room. Congratulations to our newest jackpot winner, Mrs. Linda Taylor, Janet announced. I stepped up to the microphone. This is unexpected, I said, my voice carrying further than I'd expected. I'm grateful for the blessing, and I plan to use it responsibly, to help others, to fulfill long-delayed dreams, and to live with dignity. The questions came quickly. What will you buy first? Will you quit working? What's the first thing you'll do with the money? I kept my answers focused on gratitude and future plans. I wasn't going to give them any sound bites about family drama. But then, over the crowd, I heard a voice I knew all too well. Stop! Sophie's voice cut through the air like a blade. Heads turned. Cameras swiveled. She and Michael were pushing their way to the front, Sophie in a designer dress, Michael looking grim. That's my ticket, Sophie shouted. We had an agreement. The room buzzed with murmurs. Security moved toward them, but she kept going. Everyone here should know she's stealing from her own family. I felt every camera lens shift toward me. The ticket was a Mother's Day gift, I said clearly into the microphone. Richard Harris, who was present, has already confirmed the circumstances. There was no agreement, and any claim otherwise is untrue. What do you plan to do with the money? Another reporter called out, steering it back to safer ground. I thought about all the years I'd bent over backwards to protect Michael from himself. About the weeks of lies, about the people who had believed them without question. I plan to help people who truly need it, I said. I want to start a program I've dreamed about for years, and I want to live in a way that makes me worthy of this good fortune. The ceremony wrapped up with handshakes and paperwork. Outside, as I made my way to my car, I saw Michael and Sophie by their BMW, arguing. Sophie's arms waving sharply, Michael's voice rising to match hers. I got into my own car, the oversized check in the back seat, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, they were still at it, locked in the same fight that had brought them here. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. It was a warm afternoon about a month after the ceremony when I heard a car door slam outside. I glanced through the living room window and saw Michael walking up the driveway. His shoulders were slumped, and there was none of the usual swagger in his step. He looked smaller somehow. I opened the door before he knocked. "Michael?" I said cautiously. "Mom?" he said, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, and he walked in, glancing around the living room as if he hadn't been here 100 times before. He didn't sit right away, just stood there like he was trying to decide where to begin. Finally, he lowered himself onto the couch. "I'm sorry about everything," he began. "The posts, the fight at the ceremony. I wasn't thinking clearly." I sat in my recliner, keeping a careful distance. "What's going on, Michael?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "We're in trouble, Mom. Real trouble. Sophie and I are behind on the mortgage. The credit cards are maxed. Her business isn't making money. We owe nearly $500,000. The bank's starting foreclosure." I stayed silent, letting him fill the space. "I know I've made mistakes," he continued. "But we can fix this. If you just help us out one more time, we can get back on our feet." "How much is help?" I asked. $3 million, he said quickly, like he'd rehearsed it. "That would pay everything off and give us a cushion." $3 million. He said it as if it were a casual loan, not more than I'd made in 40 years before the lottery. "You still have over $100 million left," he added. "It's nothing to you. You could give it to me and not even notice." I leaned forward slightly. "Michael, you took $15,000 from me without asking. You let Sophie drag my name through the mud for weeks. You stood by while people I've known for decades thought I was a thief. And now you want me to reward that with $3 million? His face tightened. "This is different. This is about family. You're really going to let your son lose his home?" "I'm going to let my grown son face the consequences of his choices," I said quietly. "Because maybe that's the only way you'll learn." The softness drained from his face, replaced by something cold. "If you don't help me, don't expect to see Emma again. Don't expect holidays. When she graduates, you won't be there. When I'm gone, you won't even know." The words landed like stones, but I kept my voice steady. "If that's your choice, I'll have to accept it." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But then he stood abruptly, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. The slam of the car door echoed in the quiet house. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty couch. Somewhere along the way, the little boy who used to climb into my lap with storybooks had vanished. In his place was a man I no longer recognized. Eventually, I made myself a cup of tea and took it to the back porch. The air was warm, the tulips in the garden nearly done for the season. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was mine. 3 months later, my living room was empty except for a few boxes stacked neatly by the front door. The walls were bare, the furniture sold or given away, and the place had that hollow sound a house gets when it's no longer yours. The movers loaded the last of my things into their truck while I scrolled to Michael's contact on my phone. My thumb hovered for a second before I hit block. A simple tap, and the line between us went from fragile to final. Some bridges don't burn in a blaze. They just quietly crumble until there's nothing left to cross. The drive to my new home took me through miles of open road and rolling countryside. I chose a quiet coastal town 3 hours away, far enough to make unannounced visits inconvenient, close enough that I could still get back if I ever wanted to. The house was modest, but full of light, with a little garden out back that caught the afternoon sun. You could hear gulls in the morning and smell the salt in the air. It felt nothing like the life I'd left, and that was exactly what I wanted. But the house was only part of it. The real reason I'd chosen this town was an old storefront on Main Street with a for sale sign in the window. Henderson's Bakery had been a staple here for decades, but the owner was retiring. I didn't want to run a bakery. I wanted to turn it into something more. A training cafe for single mothers and women starting over. The first time I stepped inside, the air still smelled faintly of sugar and yeast. The worn counters and scratched floors spoke of years of hard work and honest business. "You sure you want to take this on?" Tom Henderson asked when I signed the papers. "I'm sure," I said, and I meant it. 6 weeks later, Second Chance Cafe opened its doors. We served coffee, pastries, and sandwiches, but we also offered something more important: training in baking, customer service, and bookkeeping. The women we hired weren't just employees, they were students, rebuilding their lives one skill at a time. Our first morning, as customers lined up for cinnamon rolls and lattes, I stood behind the counter in an apron, feeling more alive than I had in years. Every smile, every thank you from someone who had doubted themselves, felt like a victory worth more than any check. In the evenings, I walked along the shoreline, the waves hissing against the sand. At the corner diner, I was just Linda, the woman who always ordered tomato soup and a grilled cheese. No one asked about Michael. No one brought up the lottery unless I did, which I never did. In my office at the cafe, I hung the lottery ticket in a simple wooden frame. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come wrapped in nothing, and the hardest lessons come from the people you love most. Every now and then, my phone would buzz with an unknown number. I didn't answer. If it was Michael, he'd have to leave a voicemail, and he never did. The silence told me enough. One evening, I drove past the new community center and saw the sign for the Single Mothers Fund I'd started. Underneath the name, in smaller letters, it read, "Supporting strong families through tough times." The words made my chest feel warm. I thought about all the years I'd spent pouring my energy into saving someone who didn't want to be saved, and how different it felt to invest in people who did. I still thought about Michael sometimes, not with the sharp, gut punch ache I used to feel, but with a quiet sadness. He was living with the consequences of his choices, just as I was living with mine. One Thursday evening, I locked up the cafe after a long day. Standing on the sidewalk, I looked up at the stars peeking through the coastal haze and realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology, not a reconciliation, not the past to magically fix itself. I had a life here, a good one. And the day I dug that lottery ticket out of the trash hadn't just changed my bank account. It had given me permission to walk away from what was breaking me.